Forged on the gridiron in September. Perfected in the magic of March. For the fans who love the crunch of the pads. Prefer a dunk. And expect nothing but the best. This was the Big Ten. Now this is Bigger Ten. Here's Steve Dace.
Hey folks, welcome to another week here at Bigger Ten. I'm Steve Dace on the road for work, but back there in our studios is my co-host, who will never be my partner, the one and only Aaron McIntyre, as the calendar turns to October, and this is kind of separating season now, Aaron, when we're going to separate the pretenders from the contenders, and then the contenders will be the ones playing the meaningful games in November, and soon the leaves will be changing. Maybe the wasp in our studio will go away, but probably not. How are you?
Doing okay, doing very well, doing, kind of all points in between. I'm kind of schizophrenic with my thinking this time of the year. Of course, it's an election season for our day job as well. So it is just, we are in the thick of it on all fronts.
Indeed. As they once said in the movie Madagascar, we're in the mess here. All right, we're in the mess here. All right, so let's get to it, Aaron. Let's get into the mess of our Big Five on Bigger Ten. And let's start with the Penn State Nittany Lions and that big play, quick strike offense that Andy Kotelnicki was brought in from Kansas to install. And we did see the opening weekend against West Virginia on the road impressively. Was not there against Illinois. In fact, the Illini scored the very first points of the game, went down the field on their opening possession to go up 7-0. But then we kind of saw Penn State revert to what we've seen the last few years. Drew Aller struggled to get the ball down the field. The offensive line, those two running backs, Nick Singleton, Katron Allen, completely took over. A typical dominant Penn State defensive performance, no matter who the defensive coordinator is. The Nittany Lions had 7 sacks, 13 tackles for loss. So if you're a Penn State fan, you are extremely excited that they got that win against Illinois in a ranked-on-ranked matchup that no one would have predicted to be so before the year. But on the other hand, this is the brand of football that you probably think isn't going to beat Ohio State and Michigan or win a Big Ten championship for us. So I don't know. Maybe it's a mixed bag. What do you think?
So I had my doubts about Illinois, but I think they are better for sure than I thought that they were going to be going into the season. It wasn't as if Penn State just completely crapped the bed, had 5 turnovers, something like that, and just let them hang around. There were some mistakes, don't get me wrong. So Illinois is better, but yeah, it's just the same Penn State that we've seen year after year after year, which is really good, but not good enough for their standard. So I don't know what to make, because I don't see the brand of football that they played on Saturday. I don't see that beating the biggest names. Now, it still could be good enough to make it to the college football playoff. In fact, I would predict it to be so at this point. But if your goal is to win or at least play for a Big Ten title, I just don't really see anything that much different than we have in previous years. Some really good stuff, but offensively especially just not good enough. And we really haven't seen them be explosive consistently since the days of Saquon Barkley and Trace McSorley. And McSorley was just an awesome college quarterback. Saquon Barkley, an amazing professional running back, but we really haven't seen them explode consistently since those guys were there. And if I'm a Penn State fan, on the one hand, yeah, probably going to be good enough to get in the playoff, and then what? So I am a little bit concerned in terms of the expectations when it comes to Penn State. Yet at the same time, I think we just have to play this game of reserving judgment until we see Penn State play against an Ohio State or Michigan or maybe an Indiana. I don't know if Indiana's not on their schedule, but it's certainly against an Ohio State or Michigan. Then we'll again get a real judgment of where they are.
On the other hand, you can take the optimistic view. If you're Nittany Nation, you can say, hey, we showed we can stretch the field with Kotelnicki, and now we can win the other way. We can win it too. So that's why they play the games. We're going to find out. Speaking of which, Ohio State still has not played anybody meaningful. It reminds me so much of the schedule we played last year that benefited us leading up to a natty. So maybe it'll do the same for the Buckeyes this year. But this is why they were my bonus pick in our confidence picks last week, was laying the points on the road with Ohio State. I just had a feeling that they would come up with a big effort. Their first primetime game, first opportunity in front of a primetime audience to make a statement. Their season doesn't really start until this week against Iowa, and then next week on the road against Oregon, and what a lot of people think is the most anticipated Big Ten game of the year. So heading into that stretch, just doing the eye test thing, because then you've got to mitigate it against the quality of the competition too, right? So is Ohio State just that much better than everybody else in our league? And are we going to see that in these next first two tests for them against the Hawkeyes and the Ducks?
Yeah, I don't know. If you put a gun in my head, I'd say I think so, because they do kind of, in terms of the quality of the competition, they do look somewhat like Michigan, except better in terms of the final, score on the board, I would say, by and large. I'm not even sure if they're going to get a test this weekend. I think they'll probably get the best test, the best punch that they've had so far this year. Not totally sure about that with the Hawkeyes. Certainly when they go on the road to Oregon, that's when we'll have kind of our first stress test about this Buckeyes team. But they're making the best thing I can say about them is that they're winning by a lot and they're making it look boring. I think that's the best compliment that I can give them so far this year.
It's a great position to be in as a fan, by the way. I lived through that the last few years a few times. Winning by a lot and making it boring, best place to be as a fan, no question. Speaking of that, that's kind of what Indiana's doing right now, brother. Now they're 5-0, and the Hoosiers have not been 5-0 since 1967. Which was the last time they represented the Big Ten in the Rose Bowl. They lost to eventual national champion O.J. Simpson and USC in that game. But that's the last time they represented the league in the Rose Bowl. They're 5-0. They have not played a game that was, down to the wire or a one-possession game in the final quarter yet, So I don't know, man. I mean, Ohio State, Indiana are only two of I think, 6 teams who have led in every game wire to wire this year and won by double digits. There's 6 teams that have done that, and Ohio State and Indiana are 2 of them, Aaron.
Yeah, I think we need to start talking to our kids about college football playoff bound Indiana. I mean, you look at that. You look at the schedule. I mean, they should be favored in every game except for maybe 2 now. Shouldn't they? I mean ESPN's FBI has them favored against Michigan right now. Yeah, so I saw that. I mean, I have this up from the last time we talked about them. Maybe it was last week or the week before. It was the week before. They're favored by 2 touchdowns on the road at Northwestern. I think they're going to be favored against Nebraska, going to be favored against Washington, going to be favored against Michigan State, maybe going to be favored against Michigan, not going to be favored against Ohio State, certainly going to be favored against Purdue. You've got Michigan at home. You don't know what the state of that team is going to be like on November 9th. You've got Ohio State the week before the game, so that it's not going to be a look-ahead part if they're spot if they're undefeated at that point. But, I have to think, given that offense that we've seen, you're going to have a fighting chance against the Buckeyes. Am I crazy to say it should be, at this point, from what we've seen so far, 5-0, probably going to be 6-0, that they should be on the cusp of the college football playoff? Indiana?
If they go 11-1 and their only loss is to Ohio State, are there enough quality wins on that schedule to make them one of the top 11 teams?
No.
That I don't know. But the human element of a committee and the sentimental pressure to put them on there, and then everybody's going to bring up how the perception that they got screwed in the COVID year with the Big Ten changing the conference championship eligibility rules to make sure Ohio State got in there and not them, right? Okay. But
you can just, if you keep putting up the margins that you're putting up against these opponents, that kind of mitigates the quality factor, because you can say, well, if we had a better quality, we'd probably still beat them because we're beating everybody by 3 or 4 touchdowns. So, man, it's absolutely nuts. I wasn't sure after the BTN tour. In fact, I thought maybe this is a little bit high, too high of expectations for Indiana, but good grief, they just keep putting it on people. And like I said a couple of weeks ago, it's repeatable stuff. It's not like fluky every single week. They're just lining up and just knocking the socks off of their opponents every single week.
You're right. It's a sustainable brand of football if they can keep executing it. You're right about that. All right, let's talk, since we're on the topic of history, let's talk about Dylan Gabriel, quarterback at Oregon. I want to make sure I get these stats right. He is now, when I talked in the preseason about him being a potential college football Hall of Famer, I know some of you were like, come on, man. Well, look at these numbers now. He is now third all-time in touchdown passes, Aaron. He is only the sixth FBS quarterback ever to throw for at least 16,000 yards. There's still more than half of the season to go. Okay? So, I mean, how are these?
Yeah, tell me why you wouldn't put him in the college football playoff. That's the argument that actually needs to be had. I mean, those alone. I mean, you look at somebody who has as many starts as he does, and yeah, he was aided by COVID, aided by, I think he took a red shirt. You know, he's got extra years that he's been able to add on to these stats. But it still tells you something about the player when he can actually still take advantage of all of those opportunities and perform at a high level. And you don't know how many, we've got half the season yet. Could be another game in the Big Ten championship game. Could be 2-3 playoff games that he's a part of as well.
Play 9 more games conceivably.
Exactly. Yeah. So I think the more compelling argument is, why would you not put him in? That's what I would want to hear, because those stats alone just tell me, yeah, that should be a shoo-in.
Well, I mentioned one final thing here in our Big Five. If Ohio State's not the biggest game, probably in our league this week, Michigan at Washington is, even though these two teams are shadows of where they were the last time they met for the national championship in Houston back in January. Washington has three players in the two deep in that championship game on its roster right now. Michigan has 19. So both teams, Michigan not quite as much in a rebuild mode, but Washington in a total rebuild mode, different coaching staffs. By the way, the coaching staff at Washington has Michigan ties. Jed Fish is a Harbaugh guy, came to Harbaugh with Michigan originally when he arrived in 2015. So the staffs know each other very well. These programs know each other very well, even though there's a lot of different players and coaches. A lot of NFL ties. You've got Bill Belichick's son is the DC at Washington. You have Wink Martindale is the DC at Michigan. And something you don't see every day. Now, I don't believe Michigan should be ranked in the top 10, but they are. They're number 10 in the AP poll right now. You don't see this every day, but a top 10 team is an underdog to an unranked team. And that is the case this week. Odds makers have instilled Washington as about a 2.5 point favorite against the Wolverines, which is their way of basically begging people to vote on Michigan in this game. It kind of feels to me, and I talked about this yesterday in Michigan podcast here on the channel, Aaron. It kind of feels to me as a Michigan fan that they've kind of gotten away with stuff for a few weeks here now, and sooner or later there's a comeuppance game where some of those things come due, and it kind of feels like this might be the spot. You're on the road, cross country, Big Ten teams. This as an Iowa fan, how many times you guys gone out west and gotten mollywopped out there? Okay, even in years you've been really good. For whatever reason, something happens to Big Ten teams, man, when we make those cross-country trips and it doesn't go well. Better Michigan teams than this one have lost in Husky Stadium. So I think this is going to be an L, and a fairly decisive one, meaning I think by 7 to 10 points in a game that Michigan never really seems like it's in control of. But, what's your viewpoint here as the non-Michigan fan on the panel?
So, Washington went across country to Rutgers and became only the third team in the last decade to have 500-plus yards on offense, surrender no turnovers, and put up fewer than 20 points. So,
crazy.
Yeah, that is nuts. That kind of gives me pause about Michigan's chances. The factoid that you just brought up about an unranked team being favored against a ranked team, that gives me pause. But I have to think, because of that returning production, Rutgers is good this year. They are good this year. And I've been on them on my confidence picks almost all year. But they're not at the level that Michigan is. It is supposed to be a beautiful day in Seattle on Saturday afternoon when this game kicks off. I think it's 4:30 local time. It's supposed to be a beautiful day. I don't think weather's going to be an issue. Having said that, though, I just still believe, until I see differently, that Michigan's defense can carry them. That this is toward this new iteration of Washington. This is going to be, we are actually in the Big Ten at a level that Rutgers did not provide. So I'm going with Michigan here. I think that they will find a way to get out of there with a W. Still have some relevance going down the stretch the rest of the season in the Big Ten race. Probably going to drop a game that they maybe shouldn't. I don't think it's this game, because it just seems like It just seems like as you just said there, this is going to be a game where they get exposed. I think that's everybody's take. And so I'm just bucking the popular opinion.
By the way, latest NFL mock draft for 2025 from Pro Football Focus, 4 of the top 11 picks in their mock draft, Michigan Wolverines.
There you go.
4 of the top 11. But it also goes to show what I have said from going back to when I started out in local sports talk radio. You cannot hide your quarterback in college football. You can't do it, Aaron. And that is a mitigating factor for the Wolverines this year for sure.
Oh, we got to mention this as well. I have to mention this.
Sure.
So, Minnesota, that onside kick that they recovered, and now the rules have been changed for the Big Ten about some official where they line up, whatever. Get this. That onside kick attempt came with 1:38 on the clock. I think it was 1:38.
Yeah, I was there.
A minute 38.
Yeah.
Do you know what the time on the clock was when Minnesota punted to Cooper DeJean last fourth quarter?
No way.
And Iowa versus Minnesota on the fair catch that won it?
No way. Was it the same?
Yeah.
That's nuts.
Yeah.
That is absolutely nuts. You know what's funny? Being in the stadium, we had no idea that this was some big controversial play.
Really?
But we all got home, saw that the post-game shows were talking about it. Being in the stadium, we had no idea. I've looked at some other angles too from Michigan sites. It does look like it was illegal. It looks like the offside call was wrong. I agree. Looks like it was also illegally touched by Minnesota too, which probably would have shown up in a replay. But you have to understand, if you're a Minnesota fan in our audience, the reason why Michigan fans aren't wringing our hands about this, because we're wringing our hands more by beating Minnesota by 3 for us is like losing to Minnesota. Okay, you know what I'm saying? Like, yeah. I mean, it feels like Michigan fans after that we played in that fourth quarter, we lost the game. It feels like that, you know. So that's why we're not all that worked up about the onside kick call, because it kind of feels to us like we lost based on the way we finished the game. All right, so we'll come back and we'll play our game of Would You Rather when we do. All right, Aaron, let's play some Would You Rather, and I've got the first one this week for you. Would you rather try to fix the UCLA offense off to its worst start since 1963, or the Purdue offense, which just fired its OC after averaging only 13.2 points per game against FBS foes? So you have 2 experienced quarterbacks here in Ethan Garbers and Hudson Card, but both of these programs, one off to a generationally bad start and the other one off to a nationally bad start. Which one would you rather try to fix?
So midseason we're talking about?
Yes, right now.
Yeah,
yes.
I believe in UCLA's talent more than I do in Purdue's. Purdue, you can't teach talent in the middle of the season. So I would rather try to fix UCLA's offense midseason than Purdue's, because I mean Purdue is just they mucked it up against Nebraska in that first half, but they are just, take it from an Iowa fan, that's a bad offense. That's a real bad offense. So I'm going with UCLA. I just think the talent is better that they're working with.
Not to mention, brother, if you've got to suck, wouldn't you rather be wearing those UCLA pretties? If you're going to suck,
I'd rather suck in Southern California than in West Lafayette.
Yep.
Yeah.
Indeed.
This one's for you. Would you rather bet Northwestern to cover plus 14 at home versus Indiana, or Purdue to cover plus 14 on the road versus Wisconsin?
The thing is, I just have no read on Wisconsin at all. I don't. But I have to tell you, too, I mean, whether we're talking, Randy Walker, Pat Fitzgerald, David Braun, okay, isn't Northwestern coming off a bye?
Yep.
And winning on the road at Indiana outright, like the ultimate Northwestern thing.
Mm-hmm.
That kind of, you know what I'm saying?
Yep.
Some weird score, but
that grass is 5 feet high.
Yeah,
although I don't think they're playing on grass this year, but whatever.
Yeah, so I'm actually going to say Northwestern.
Yeah, that would be my pick too.
Indiana gets into the poll. Everybody's talking about them. You know, they're not used to this level of hype, but the main reason why I just don't trust Purdue or Wisconsin at all. I have no clue where either program's at, where their heads are at. I just don't know.
All right.
I don't want to play anything in those games.
Yeah.
All right, would you rather bet, Aaron, for you, would you rather bet Iowa money line at Ohio State or Minnesota money line at home versus USC.
I would rather bet Minnesota at home versus USC. I've seen enough the last couple of weeks to make me think that USC could do enough to shoot themselves in the foot to keep a Minnesota hanging around. Whereas with Iowa, strangely, I'm worried about the offense, but they've shown consistently they can run the ball. Going to be a completely different bear this weekend. It's actually the defense and the secondary that I'm most concerned about. I mean, you've shown some real chinks in the armor consistently. I mean, every single game except for the first game against FCS Illinois State, you've seen some real chinks in the armor of that Iowa secondary. You know, I thought preseason when they did their bus tour, Phil Parker saying that he's concerned about the secondary. That's his position group, the Iowa defensive coordinators. That's kind of his bread and butter. I thought he was just saying that to challenge his guys. Turns out he was telling the truth because they've shown some real weaknesses. And just thinking about Jeremiah Smith, who looks incredible. I mean, he's kind of been overshadowed by, who's it, Ryan, what's his nuts from Alabama, Ryan Williams, who is incredible in and of itself that he's a 17-year-old kid.
Also only 17 years
17 years old, yeah. But Jeremiah Smith is just an incredible. And then, you know, across from him, you know, you've got some real question marks with Emmanuel Abuka. I cannot put any faith right now in Iowa's secondary. So as much as I would like to say that I'd bet on my favorite team on the road at Ohio State, I just don't think Iowa has the horses to keep up. And I think USC on the road again in the Midwest could make enough mistakes to keep Minnesota hanging around. Final one is for you. At this point in the season, would you rather be Ryan Day or Dan Lanning?
I'd rather be Dan Lanning. I've got a more secure situation, and I've got, if we only go like 10-2, as long as we make the playoff, this was a successful season. I've got a built-in excuse or reason, depending on your perspective. If we don't win it at all, despite how much we spent on this roster, the newness factor going into the new conference, there's no margin for error for Ryan Day at all. None. Absolutely none. It is natty or bust. It is natty or find a job in the NFL, basically. I mean, that's where he is at. So I think I'd rather be Dan Lanning. Also, just looks like he's having more fun, too, frankly. All right, we'll come back. When we do, we'll have our X poll results and our feedback of the week. Stay tuned. This week's X poll results, we asked you which one-loss Big Ten team do you feel the best about heading into October. Easy for me to say. 39% of you said Iowa, 28% of you said Illinois, 21% of you said Michigan, 12% said Nebraska. Your thoughts on how the audience that follows us on X broke down here, Aaron?
Well, I voted for Michigan because I'm just going to kind of ride or die with the pedigree that they already have on that team, really on both sides of the ball, except for one important position, and that happens to be quarterback. But I saw my team, Iowa, should have won 11 games in the regular season last year without actually having a quarterback and not as good players as Michigan. So if Michigan can do what Iowa did last year at a higher level and just figure out how to win sloppy, nasty-looking games, then I'm just going to ride or die with them. I don't think Iowa should be number one here. Now, I know that I'm probably going to be in the minority voting for Michigan, but I would actually go with what we've seen so far, probably Illinois. Illinois, maybe to a lesser extent Nebraska, but I think it should be something along the lines of Illinois, Michigan, Iowa tied, and then Nebraska, just because of Nebraska's reputation for inventing ways to lose games. So that's kind of how I thought it should shake out. I don't know if we have a disproportionate amount of Iowa fans in our audience, but that was way, way above where I thought this would be.
Okay. That brings us to our feedback of the week. And I wanted to make this correction. I said on our X account that Minnesota has not beaten Michigan since 2005. How I missed the game that got Brady Hoke fired in 2014 is beyond me. But this is the game where Minnesota knocked out Michigan's starting quarterback, and he got put back in with an obvious concussion and led to the firing of Brady Hoke, set the stage for Jimmy Harbaugh getting hired in 2014. And so I wanted to make sure, duly noted there, okay, by one of our fans and followers on X, wanted to make the correction here and not bury it. Yes, It was actually 2014, so it's been a decade. Not since 2005, 2 decades, only one since Minnesota last won the Little Brown Jug. So correction there, duly noted. I was not trying to be, that wasn't meant to be snarky. It really wasn't.
But it was perfect. It's not been 2 decades. It's only been a decade since y'all beat us.
I really wasn't trying to be snarky, man. I wasn't. So. Not that I'm above that, of course, but I really wasn't. I really wasn't. All right, that's going to do it for this week's episode of Bigger 10. You can like, rate, subscribe, share, follow, 5-star review. Please do so if you're watching on YouTube, listening on iTunes, or elsewhere. Doing those things helps us, the algorithm, to find us more Big Ten fans just like you, and we would greatly appreciate that. So thank you very much. You can follow us in between episodes as well on X at Bigger 10 there, at Bigger 10 on X. Until the next time, for Aaron McIntyre, I'm Steve Deace. We'll see you next week right here on Bigger 10.